This could be the most mysterious base in America. The entrance is so cold that there isn't even a nameplate. Anyone who wants to enter has to press the button in front of the door. Immediately, a device appears from the wall to check. First, it scans your eyes to verify your identity. Only when it is authenticated will the door open. You think that's it, but it's not that simple. Next, the security guard will remind you to watch your feet, because the floor can collapse at any moment. Then you will be taken down to the underground base thousands of meters deep. On the elevator at this time is a rookie named Myers. He is completely bewildered in the new world. After the elevator stops at Area 51, Myers pushes open the golden door engraved with ancient patterns. Behind the gate is a huge library full of books. Myers is still looking around when suddenly a strange sound comes from the green glass wall next to him. A strange creature suddenly appears in the aquarium. Myers was so scared that his heart almost jumped out of his chest. At the same time, an old man appeared behind Myers. He was the head of this place, Professor Broom. It turned out that this place was the Research and Defense Department of Folk and Supernatural Affairs. This was a place that specialized in investigating mysterious phenomena and gathered people with special talents. The mermaid from earlier was one of them. His name was Sapien. In 1865, Professor Broom found Sapien in a secret room in an abandoned hospital. At that time, Sapien was still young. Although Sapien's body smelled of rotten eggs, his mind was extremely intelligent. He liked reading books more than eating. Sapien was not the only special person here. Immediately after, Professor Broom took Myers to meet the main character of this organization. When they said goodbye, Professor Broom also put 2 chocolate bars in Myers's hand. He turned around and left. The character might not be a simple person, because he was locked in a room behind a half-meter thick iron door. Inside that room, there were also a series of monsters. Accompanying Myers was an agent pushing a cart full of food, because the people living in that room had to eat 6 meals a day. His favorite food was none other than chocolate. Finally, Myers met the main character, a person that Myers often saw on the cover of comic books. He was a living legend, the Baron of Hell, Hellboy, with skin as red as tomato sauce. He was smoking a very cool cigar. On his head were 2 giant iron trays that used to be horns. People called him Hellboy because his past was closely related to hell. The story began in 1944. A year before Hitler died, Professor Broom and an Allied army quietly surrounded a ruined building in the rain at night. Inside the ruins were Nazi soldiers working urgently. A cold masked officer was commanding the soldiers. Professor Broom quickly realized that it was Cronin, Hitler's #1 assassin. Cronin was carrying out a secret experimental plan. It combined the Nazis' cutting-edge technology and black magic to open the gates of hell. At the same time, he summoned 7 gods of chaos to help them turn the tide. The magic user was the famous bald wizard, the notorious Russian mystic priest, Rasputin. Rasputin wore an iron glove connected to a magical device. He turned the control knobs while chanting and starting the summoning ritual. A glowing black hole appeared in the air. The gates of hell were officially opened. This gate had a suction force that could suck everything around it into it. At this time, the Allied troops had surrounded the testing area. Seeing the dire situation, the commanding officer immediately threw a grenade. The explosion created a powerful shockwave. An unfortunate Nazi was thrown straight into the gates of hell by the shockwave. The fascist was then burned to ashes. Allied soldiers took the opportunity to counterattack. The masked assassin Cronin fired all the bullets and calmly threw away his gun. He pulled out 2 sharp blades from his wrist. This was his real job. The blades were so sharp that they cut very quickly. All the soldiers who rushed forward were killed by him. Professor Broom, who had never fought before, was also shot. In the midst of the chaos, he crawled on the ground, trying to survive. Cronin gradually approached. At this crucial moment, the commanding officer fired several bullets at Cronin. All the bullets hit him, but he still did not fall. It seemed like he was no longer human. Taking advantage of his carelessness, Professor Broom pulled the grenade pin and threw it at the summoning machine. Cronin rushed forward to stop him, but a terrible explosion tore him to pieces. A piece of metal pierced through his body. The explosion of the device also abruptly interrupted the summoning of the gate of hell. The wizard Rasputin, who was standing nearby, was also sucked by the vortex from the gate, tearing his skin. He was also dragged into the black hole of chaos. The Allied forces had successfully destroyed the Nazis' evil plot. The commanding officer thought the mission was over, but Professor Broom had a feeling that the gates of hell had been open for so long that something must have escaped. So he ordered the soldiers to search the entire area. Unexpectedly, Cronin, who had been nailed to the wall, had disappeared. It was clear that he was neither human nor ghost. Not long after, there was movement in a nearby cellar. A red creature suddenly jumped onto a high platform, but Professor Broom knew at a glance that this was not a monkey. Because it had horns growing from its head, it had one hand as big as a giant war hammer, and even a tail behind it. Professor Broom immediately asked the soldiers to put down their guns. Then he took out a chocolate bar from his pocket and held it in front of the child. The boy quickly grabbed it and ate it all. Professor Broom then took out another chocolate bar to continue tempting the boy. Hod. The red boy jumped into his warm arms, so Professor Broom became the father of this child. Broom named him Hellboy, Baron of Hell. Now that Hellboy has grown up, he has become the pillar of this place. But his personality is not simple. He just learned that his father found him a new assistant and contact, a guy named Myers. Hellboy was very unhappy. Hellboy didn't even bother to pay attention to that naive person. Right at that moment, the red alarm sounded. A new mission had come, so Hellboy decided to take Myers along to get acquainted. The destination was an antiquities museum. A strange murder had just happened here. The special forces arrived at the scene in a super camouflaged garbage truck. Hellboy looked out at the curious crowd outside and sighed. With this strange appearance, he could only go out when there was a mission. Every time Hellboy went on a mission, he carried a super large pistol. When the team entered the museum, Hellboy realized that his father was also there. Hellboy quickly hid the cigarette he was holding behind his back. It seemed that the person Hellboy was most afraid of was still his father. Professor Broom explained that there was a mysterious creature that had killed many guards. Its target was a 16th century statue that was on display in the museum. That monster was currently lurking behind that door. Sapien, the merman, put his hand on the door and he felt a dark and brutal energy inside. Hellboy was indifferent to these strange things. Hellboy had seen all kinds of supernatural things. He carried the cannon alone and entered the room. The scene inside was like a massacre. Dead bodies were lying everywhere. Suddenly, a slime dripped from the ceiling. Hellboy looked up and saw a monster hanging upside down from the ceiling. It was gnawing deliciously at the corpses. Meanwhile, outside the door, Sapien has verified the monster's identity. Its name was Samuel, the legendary hellhound. At that moment, Samuel jumped down. Samuel saw the huge Hellboy in front of him and felt danger, so Samuel immediately ran away. Hellboy raised his large pistol and fired continuously. Finally, the fatal shot hit the monster. Hellboy saw it lying motionless on the floor, looking like it was really dead. He turned around and walked away leisurely. Another mission was easily completed, but Sapien gave Hellboy some not-so-good news. Samuel had the ability to regenerate. Hearing this, Hellboy stopped and quickly turned his head to look. Sure enough, he couldn't see the monster's body anywhere. The next second, Samuel appeared right in front of Hellboy and swung a punch, sending Hellboy flying. The blow was so powerful that Hellboy flew over the wall and fell to the ground in pain. Samuel also jumped down from above. Samuel's long tongue shot out and wrapped around Hellboy's gun-holding arm. Samuel breathed fire, making Hellboy's hand smoke. The burning arm made Hellboy scream in pain. At that moment, a gunshot rang out. It was Myers who had arrived in time. Myers shot off the monster's tongue and then fired continuously to save Hellboy from the hands of death. Only then did Hellboy begin to look at Myers with different eyes. Myers was no longer a fool in Hellboy's eyes. Hellboy asked Myers to help him reload. Then Hellboy got up and continued fighting. Hellboy raised his gun and shot straight at the wall where the monster was clinging. The bullet hit the monster, causing it to fall to the ground. The traffic was as suffocating as if it were in the middle of the bustling city. Hellboy knew something was wrong. If the monster was allowed to rush into the residential area, the casualties would be extremely high. So Hellboy immediately chased after it. The monster rushed through the dense traffic like an ant. Myers also quickly chased after it, but he was hit by a car and rolled onto the street. He was in danger of being hit by a car. Hellboy landed from the sky and blocked right in front of Myers. He pulled out his never-before-used rock arm and punched the front of the car with all his might. The car flew into the air, turned 360 degrees like an action movie, and landed smoothly on the ground. This action saved Myers from death by a hair's breadth. Hellboy told Myers to stay still because he was only blocking Hellboy's way. Hellboy followed the trail of blood the monster left when it escaped. Then Hellboy followed it into the subway tunnel. Samuel was not dead yet, but it attacked Hellboy. Hellboy was knocked down by Samuel to completely destroy this monster with the ability to regenerate endlessly. Hellboy did not hesitate to touch the subway tracks. Electricity ran through Hellboy's body and went straight to Samuel. Samuel struggled, but Hellboy held him tight. Just a few seconds later, the monster was burned alive and turned into a pile of black coal. It had no chance of reviving. Hellboy still stood up calmly. After all, he was from hell, and his body was not afraid of fire. After Hellboy killed the monster, he called his contact. Myers intended to take this opportunity to show himself, but before Myers could finish his sentence, Hellboy hung up. Myers had no choice but to remain silent. Now Myers understood that being Hellboy's liaison was not as easy as he thought, but while Hellboy was leaving the tunnel, he did not know that two souls had flown out of Samuel's body. They quietly sank into the darkness until they were caught by a bald man. It was none other than the magician Rasputin, who had been dead for more than 60 years. Next to Rasputin was the mysterious fascist assassin Cronin. It turned out that not long before, Cronin had led people to an ancient sacrificial area in Siberia, a mysterious place filled with evil spirits. He coldly stabbed the tour guide with a fatal blow. Fresh blood flowed like a stream, soaking the grooves on the altar, and then gathered into a terrifying lake of blood. From then on, the magician Rasputin was officially summoned back. After Rasputin was resurrected, he still had not forgotten his old grudge, because he was unable to summon the 7 gods of chaos from hell last year. This time, he is plotting a new dark plan. Ken. At the same time, the special forces were cleaning up the battlefield in the museum. When Sapien touched the broken pieces of the statue, he felt uneasy. Suddenly, he felt a wave of fear. Sapien told Professor Broom to put his hand in Sapien's hand to share his spiritual feelings. Thanks to his extremely strong psychic ability, Sapien led Professor Broom back in time a few hours ago to find out what really happened. It turned out that Cronin, like a black spider, had quietly crawled down from the ceiling. Behind him was a blonde woman holding a large hammer and then smashed the glass covering the stone statue. Cronin immediately pulled out his deadly sword. He slashed the statue in half. The woman took out a sparkling crystal from inside, but at that moment, the museum guards surrounded the two. Cronin was not afraid. He drew his sword and danced like he was dancing in hell. The guard fired continuously and bullets were all over Cronin's body, but no blood flowed. Then he counterattacked madly. In the blink of an eye, Cronin had killed all the guards in front of him. At that moment, Rasputin also stepped out majestically from the darkness. He signaled the woman to open the crystal tube and poured out sparkling grains of sand. But this was not ordinary sand, but the condensed tears of thousands of angels. Inside the grains of sand was the sealed soul of the hellish monster. Samuel. Rasputin began to perform the dark ritual. He summoned the beast from the depths of hell into the real world. Professor Broom suddenly woke up from his past illusion. He did not expect that the enemy from more than 60 years ago would appear. It was clear that the world was facing an impending great disaster. But the professor who had fought in the past was no longer a young man. He was old and weak, and his body was withering. Time was running out. That was why he chose young Myers to take his place, to take care of and protect Hellboy. At this time, Hellboy sneaked out to get some fresh air. He arrived at the gate of a mental hospital, where the only girl he secretly loved was Liz. That girl was Liz, who grew up with him. She was Hellboy's youth and confidant. It turned out that Liz was also a member of the Special Forces team. On the outside, she looked normal like everyone else, but in fact, she was a fire witch. Liz could burn everything with blue flames all over her body, but she couldn't stand the feeling of cold loneliness. Liz often had scary hallucinations, so she asked to withdraw from the Special Forces team and voluntarily lived in this mental hospital. Liz was the only person Hellboy dared to open his heart to, so every time he went on a mission, he sneaked over to see her for a bit. And at this moment, Professor Broom and the Special Forces team arrived to take Hellboy back. They didn't want him to come here anymore, because every time Liz saw Hellboy, her mood became unstable, and she was afraid she couldn't control herself. The Special Forces team was about to rush in to stop Hellboy, but Myers stopped them. Myers wanted to give the two of them some time alone. Professor Broom looked at the young Myers in front of him and felt that he had not chosen the wrong successor. He had not chosen the wrong person to protect his child. When Myers was about to step in to bring Hellboy back, Hellboy could barely stand. He almost collapsed on the spot. It turned out that Hellboy was very seriously injured, but he still tried to brace himself in front of Liz, so as not to worry her. Only then did Myers begin to understand how special the woman who had tormented Hellboy for the rest of his life was. After returning to the base, Sapien felt that something was wrong with the wound. Only after examining Sapien carefully did he discover that in just that short moment, Samuel had managed to lay 3 small pearl-like eggs in his hand. This Samuel truly had an extremely terrifying reproductive ability. But Sapien, don't panic, because these eggs can only survive in a damp and dark environment. If light shines on them, they will die immediately. Professor Broom warned that the danger was extreme. It was possible that the eggs had been laid en masse in the underground tunnel. Professor Broom immediately mobilized all the agents of the Bureau to conduct a raid tomorrow on the place where Samuel had appeared. They would check every corner. But while the plan was being implemented, Rasputin was also secretly taking action. Rasputin quietly appeared in Liz's hospital room at the mental hospital like a ghost. Rasputin bent down and placed a light kiss on Liz's forehead. Immediately, in Liz's dream, she returned to her dark childhood. She was bullied by children and had stones thrown at her, bleeding all over her head. She could not help but start spitting fire from her hands. Everyone looked at her as if she were a monster. At that moment, Liz completely lost control in reality. Flames erupted from her entire body. The fire burned down the entire room. Only a few seconds later, the entire mental hospital shook violently. The morgue building was completely destroyed. Liz was officially detained. A person with such dangerous abilities could not easily return to society. At this time, Myers was the representative to receive Liz. But Myers was not like ordinary agents. He had a warm heart and rare sympathy. He did not treat her as a dangerous person. He did not wear handcuffs or have an armored car. He simply got in the car together as two friends. It was a warm and gentle ride. On the way back to the station, Liz no longer felt imprisoned. She even smiled and enjoyed it. At that moment, on Hellboy's side, a large-scale raid also began. The whole team acted extremely fiercely. At an abandoned railway, Sapien sensed something unusual. Behind a wall under the lake, it was very likely a nest of hellhounds. But Hellboy did not like frills. He used his steel fist to punch 3 times, causing the wall to burst open like a termite nest. He entered the room behind the wall and opened the lid of an old water tank to check. Since this area was all water, the main task was assigned to Sapien, an underwater expert. Before Sapien went into the water, he was given a small pendant. It was the Virgin Mary in Rome, protecting Sapien's safe return. Sapien immediately jumped into the pool. Sure enough, in the crevice of the rock in the lake was a huge nest of hell eggs. Just as he was about to reach out to check, the protective pendant suddenly fell off his neck. Sapien bent down to pick it up when a hell dog emerged from behind him. He was frightened and dived out of there. Thanks to his ability to swim fast, he managed to squeeze into the narrow crevice and narrowly escape death. Hellboy was still searching above the water. Suddenly, a figure appeared in front of him. It was Cronin, the #1 assassin under Rasputin. As soon as Cronin saw Hellboy, he turned around and ran. Hellboy also chased Cronin immediately, but it seemed he had fallen into a trap that was set up. Hellboy chased him all the way to Cronin's secret room. Here, all kinds of masks and tools of the immortal were displayed, like a museum. Hellboy had not yet had time to criticize these antiques when a hellhound suddenly rushed out from the shelf. The two creatures wrestled and fell into a deep hole. The fall ended at a ventilation pipe. They suddenly fell straight into a subway station. The surrounding people were scared away by the falling objects, but it seemed that this group of people was attracted by this situation. Two monsters fought, but no one ran away. The hellhound struggled and used its claws like knives to slash and cut everything within reach. Luckily, Hellboy dodged quickly. The column next to it was smashed by the monster. Unexpectedly, that column was a load-bearing column. As a result, the second floor collapsed. A pile of steel frames fell down on Hellboy. The hellhound was happy because it thought it had defeated Hellboy. It turned its head to stare at the trembling crowd outside. Even though Hellboy didn't have the ability to revive, his power was enormous. His back was full of broken glass and covered in blood, but he still jumped up like an angry porcupine. Hellboy suddenly heard a kitten meowing. It turned out that there was a box full of cute kittens next to him. While he was still looking at the kitten, the hellhound used its long tongue attack again. But this time, Hellboy was alert and caught the tongue that was coming. Hellboy threw the dog into the tunnel, but his other hand was holding the kitten. With one hand fighting the monster and the other holding the cat, he was pulled back by the monster. He was getting closer and closer to the place full of sharp pieces of glass. Just then, a train rushed in and crushed the monster. The impact was so strong that its tongue was severed. This fight ended. Hellboy gently picked up the kitten and returned it to its owner. He did not forget to use his concrete fist to stroke it again. Meanwhile, Sapien had just escaped death and climbed out of the water tank. But before he could breathe, the hellhounds emerged again. They followed him closely. Sapien was so panicked that he didn't dare to breathe. He quietly pressed the button to send a distress signal. Meanwhile, the other agents of the civil service were equally miserable. Cronin appeared in front of an agent. Although the agent continuously fired bullets, it was completely ineffective, but in the end, the agent was stabbed in the head by him. Before collapsing, the agent still tried to contact Hellboy for help. Hellboy immediately ran quickly toward the sound of gunfire. Cronin also heard footsteps approaching, but his next action surprised everyone. He lay down on the ground, turned the knob right at his heart, and entered a state of feigned death. When Hellboy arrived, he only saw 2 corpses. One of them was his old teammate. He immediately called for reinforcements, but the headset was silent and there was no signal because all the agents at the scene were dead. Finally, Hellboy brought the seriously injured Sapien back to base safely. The deputy chief always hated Hellboy because he thought the big Indian man was just a monster. The loss was so heavy that of course he blamed Hellboy. The hot-tempered Hellboy got angry when he heard that. Hellboy was about to explode when he saw Liz's figure. She was brought back by Myers. Hellboy was overjoyed. Only then did Hellboy realize that Myers was useful. While Hellboy was was writing a love letter to Liz in the room, she suddenly appeared to play with him. Hellboy was confused and stiff. He turned into a shy guy. But when he heard her say she wanted to go out for coffee in the sea, middle of the night, and they were going with Myers, Hellboy's expression immediately changed. Hellboy's remaining goodwill towards Myers also disappeared. Myers still didn't understand what was happening. Not long after, an agent pushed a cart full of food to Hellboy's door. Myers heard a loud noise inside and immediately felt something was wrong. He quickly opened the iron door and discovered a big hole in the cement wall. Hellboy had escaped. Professor Broom was disappointed and said that Hellboy was an adult but still had the brain of a child. It wasn't the first time Hellboy had escaped from the base, so he didn't want to find Hellboy anymore. Late at night on the street, Myers and Liz were like a real couple. The two of them were holding coffee and chatting animatedly. On the roof of the building behind them, a huge creature appeared and followed them stealthily like a ninja. In Hellboy's eyes, the two of them were really unpleasant. He had to see what they were talking about. Hellboy jumped off the roof and landed on the balcony, but he misjudged the distance and almost fell straight down to the street. Luckily, he caught the edge of the wall in time. Hellboy saw a little girl standing on the balcony staring at him without blinking. Unexpectedly, the little girl said, "I know you." Hellboy signaled the little girl to be quiet because he was on a secret surveillance mission. The main target was the two people sitting down there. Myers and Liz went to a small park. They sat down and talked to each other. She also brought cookies and milk for Hellboy to eat. One adult and one child were sitting on the roof, like a pair of onlookers. They were talking about the couple below. Hellboy saw Myers pretend to yawn and stretch, so he knew Myers was going to hug Liz in an ambiguous way. Hellboy wouldn't let Myers succeed that easily. Just as Myers was expressing his feelings, a rock suddenly flew from somewhere and hit him on the forehead. He was in so much pain that he had to endure it. Looking around, he still didn't know who the culprit was. While the children were still busy making love, Professor Broom was in the base dissecting Cronin's body. There was no blood left in his body. His heart was only powered by a rotating iron shaft. Professor Broom found a small piece of paper in Cronin's body. He immediately brought it back to his office to analyze the words on it. It turned out that on the paper was written an address number 16, Sebastian Cemetery in Russia. That was the grave of the magician Rasputin. Just as the professor was looking at the documents, the corpse suddenly stood up. It quietly walked to the desk and reassembled each mechanical part like a toy. While Professor Broom was engrossed in the documents, he suddenly realized that the murderer had appeared in the room at some point. Rasputin also suddenly appeared in front of Professor Broom. Professor Broom only needed to glance to see Rasputin. He understood that the entire plot, from beginning to end, was a trap set by Rasputin. The main goal was to lure Hellboy to the exact address of the tomb in Russia, because Hellboy was a prerequisite to summon the devil from hell. Then Rasputin put his hand on the professor's head and forced him to see what the future would be like. Professor Broom was dragged into a future illusion where time was in chaos and the hellish monster had spread out to the human world, which was destroyed under the devil's feet. It was Hellboy who opened the gates of hell. At that moment, he had grown back his devil horns and became the son of hell himself. Professor Broom woke up from his hallucination. Broom still believed that Hellboy would not go that way. The child he had raised since childhood would always be a good person. Rasputin saw that and immediately ordered Cronin to kill Professor Broom. Professor Broom's death was also the final goal of his plan. He was sure that Hellboy would go to Russia for revenge. At this time, Hellboy was still confiding in the girl on the roof. Suddenly, a strange noise was heard on the street. Many police cars were parked in front of the building. Healer knew for sure that something big had happened. Hellboy immediately returned to the base. The father he loved the most was now just a cold corpse. Hellboy hugged Professor Broom. He hugged tightly the person who loved him the most and had left him forever. On the day Professor Broom was sent to his final resting place, all the staff of the Defense Department were present. Only Hellboy was absent, but Liz knew that Hellboy was still watching his father from afar. The Indian man let the cold rain cry for Hellboy. Hellboy's hand clenched the pendant his father left him. Although Hellboy didn't say a word, Liz knew he was in more pain than anyone else. 3 days later, the team led by the deputy director and the elite agents flew to Moscow. Because Sapien was still being treated, Liz would go with Hellboy this time. After passing through the snow, they finally reached the bus cemetery. On the ice, they searched the cemetery, but still couldn't find grave number 16. Hellboy decided to ask the locals. He took out a compass. Following the compass's instructions, he opened the lid of a coffin. Inside was a shriveled mummy. Hellboy raised the magic necklace and muttered a spell. Unexpectedly, the mummy actually jumped up. Soon, everyone saw Hellboy carrying the tiny mummy back. Under the guidance of the corpse, they finally found grave number 16. The team entered entered the underground hall below. Hellboy intended to tell everyone not to separate. Suddenly the floor erupted with iron plates, and the group was separated. There was no other way, so they had to split up and act according to the situation. Hellboy and the deputy director entered a secret room inside. Cronin was listening to music when Hellboy tried to sneak up and kill him. Unexpectedly, the deputy director behind him shouted. It turned out that his hand was cut by a knife. Hellboy turned around and saw that Cronin had disappeared without a trace. The two searched the entire room. Cronin suddenly rushed out and stabbed the deputy director. Hellboy quickly used his giant arm to block the attack. Unexpectedly, Cronin acted very quickly. Cronin only needed one knife to cut off Hellboy's nose. Hellboy immediately became angry. Hellboy grabbed Cronin's pair of knives with one hand. Then Hellboy threw a steel punch straight at Cronin's mask, as if he wanted to break Cronin's face. Hellboy's father's killer was beaten by Hellboy until his mouth and face were distorted. Cronin fell to the floor, looking miserable beyond description. He thought that was it, but Cronin still let out a horrible laugh. Hellboy heard it and was scared. Suddenly, Cronin pressed a switch. The wooden floor under Hellboy's feet exploded. Hellboy was about to fall into a bottomless pit. Luckily, Hellboy's reflexes were quick enough to grab the rope. Below was a nest of traps filled with sharp blades like demons. If Hellboy fell, he would die. Cronin watched Hellboy hanging there and happily approached. Cronin thought he would kill his opponent easily, but before Cronin could do anything, his head was hit by a flying throw. The deputy director threw something at Cronin's face to stop him. Hellboy took the opportunity to hook the rope around Cronin's neck and pulled with all his strength. Hellboy pulled Cronin down into the pit of death. The blade pierced Cronin's body, but Hellboy still couldn't kill Cronin. Hellboy had to carry a huge piece of iron and drop it down the pit. If Cronin didn't die, he would stay down there forever. After this life and death battle, Hellboy and the deputy director finally put aside their grudges. The two switched to a harmonious partnership. Meanwhile, Liz and Myers went in a different direction. They came to a land of water and rocks, but they didn't expect that they had just stepped into the Hellhound's nest. The monster's egg nest stretched out. The Hellhounds looked at the intruders. The back door was also locked with no way out. An agent quickly pulled out a cluster bomb to destroy the monster's nest with an explosion, but before he could press the button, he was knocked down by the monster. Myers also took out his gun and fired at the monsters. However, his bullets had no effect on them. At that moment, the ceiling suddenly collapsed into a pile of rocks. It turned out that Hellboy received Liz's distress signal. He broke through the ceiling and jumped down to rescue her. He immediately rushed to fight the monsters. Before the battle with just one monster, Hellboy felt very tired. Now he was fighting the whole group of monsters alone. If this continued, Hellboy would die right before Liz's eyes. So Liz told Myers to slap her hard to wake her up. Myers didn't understand anything, but he did as Liz said. This slap was like turning on a superpower switch. Liz's hands started to burn with blue flames. Liz told Myers to quickly find a place to hide because she was about to use her ultimate move. Liz released all her energy. The blue flames rose and burned down the entire cave. An explosion shook the sky and earth. When Myers woke up, he found himself handcuffed. Hellboy was also tied with a very heavy chain that he couldn't escape. It turned out that the two of them had been kidnapped by Rasputin and brought back to the base. Liz was still lying unconscious on a stone table. Only then did Rasputin turn to Hellboy. Rasputin pointed to the stone horn on Hellboy's head and said this was the key to open the gate to hell. Hellboy just needed to put his hand into the crack of the time demon and they could open the gate to hell and summon the chaotic spirit. Coincidentally, there was a full moon in the sky. This was the perfect moment to open the gate. Rasputin saw that Hellboy was still hesitating, so he immediately sucked Liz's soul dry. Rasputin said that if Hellboy wanted to save Liz, he had no choice but to open the gate. Hellboy struggled frantically, but strangely, even though he was very strong, he still couldn't break the chains that bound him. It turned out that Hellboy's real name from hell was engraved on it. As long as he called out that original name, the chains would automatically open. Hellboy had no other choice. Because of the girl he loved, he was forced to say the forbidden name. The lock automatically opened. Hellfire began to rise from Hellboy's body. The two scars that he had worn away were now gradually growing back into two complete horns. Hellboy had returned to the form of the son of hell. His head was burning fiercely. He walked to the fateful stone. Hellboy resolutely put his hand into that magical crack and twisted his arm around. Immediately, the giant rock released a pillar of light that pierced the dark night. the gate of hell was opened once again. In another dimension, the ancient demon that had been frozen since the beginning of time, lost in chaos, gradually awakened. It was about to burst through the gate to the human world. Now, Hellboy only needed to put his hand into one more crack, and the summoning ritual would be complete. At the critical moment, Myers gritted his teeth and broke the chains. Myers shouted for Hellboy and threw the commemorative cross at him. Hellboy caught the cross and immediately opened his hand to see. The cross he had just touched left a bright golden mark burning in his palm. At that moment, memories of his adoptive father flooded back. Hellboy woke up and he no longer listened to Rasputin's seduction. Hellboy used both hands to break the pair of demon horns that were growing back on his head. The summoning failed and the gate of hell closed again. Hellboy did not want to hear more of Rasputin's lies. Hellboy grabbed the broken horn and stabbed it straight into Rasputin's stomach. Then Hellboy picked up the unconscious Liz and prepared to leave this damn devil's nest. But from Rasputin's pierced stomach crawled out a monster full of terrifying tentacles. Hellboy saw that the situation was not good, so he immediately told Myers to retreat as quickly as possible, but the monster kept getting bigger and bigger. Hellboy knew he had to stay and end everything here, so he entrusted Liz to Myers. Hellboy brought a capacitor bomb ready to make a big explosion, but before he could do anything, the monster's tentacles quickly grabbed him and pulled him back. This was not an ordinary monster, but a hellish demon on par with the insane. Hellboy was beaten to pieces by its tentacles. He had a hard time escaping when he discovered a statue holding giant scissors next to him. Hellboy did not hesitate and borrowed them. Then he chopped straight at the octopus tentacles. Although Hellboy struggled until he was exhausted, he was still thrown into the air by the monster. Just when he was about to be swallowed into its stomach, he pulled the pin of the capacitor bomb. He didn't hesitate for a second and then swallowed the bomb into the demon's stomach. The monster's belly began to glow and swell up, exploding like a firecracker. Hellboy crawled out of the pile of shredded flesh, and he saved the world. But when Hellboy returned to Myers, Liz still hadn't woken up. She was no longer breathing. A man who could save the world was powerless before the life of the woman he loved. But then Liz suddenly moved slightly. She was really awake. Liz hugged Hellboy. She said that from hell she heard him calling her. That brought her back. The two truly loved each other. Finally, they shared a fateful kiss. They melted into each other in the blue fire. This was the fire of love. Myers watched that scene and he understood that he had lost. He had nothing left to hold on to. Only Hellboy was worthy of being with Liz. Hellboy went through so much pain and trials, and finally he became a true man. Even though his background is not perfect, even though his appearance is not beautiful, he chose to take responsibility. That is why he deserves this love. The movie ends here. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, and see you again.